I want to tell you about a patient of mine. His name is Edward. Edward is 82 years old. And the first thing I noticed when he walked into my office 8 months ago was that he did not use the wall for support. When he came around the corner of the corridor, he did not hold the door frame when he stepped into the room. He walked in straight with the kind of ease that you stop expecting at a certain age. And he sat down in the chair across from my desk without using the armrests, without the careful lowering, the bracing, the slight wince that I see so often in patients his age. He just sat down. The way a person sits down when sitting down is not something they have to think about. I introduced myself and I looked at his chart, and then I looked at it again because the numbers on his chart were not the numbers I was expecting to see for an 82-year-old man who had smoked for 30 years. His coronary artery calcium score, ordered by his cardiologist 6 months earlier, was 28. I want you to understand what that number means. For a man of 82, the median calcium score for men in their early 80s in the population studies is somewhere between 300 and 400 or higher. A score of 28 in an 82-year-old man who smoked for 3 decades is not simply good, it is exceptional. It is the kind of score that makes a cardiologist check the patient's date of birth twice to make sure they are looking at the right chart. Edward's cardiologist had told him that his coronary arteries look like the arteries of a man in his early 50s, and that in 28 years of cardiology practice, he had seen scores like this in men Edward's age fewer times than he could count on one hand. His blood pressure that morning was 119/71 without any blood pressure medication. His total cholesterol was 172. His LDL was 88. His HDL was 67, which is excellent. His triglycerides were 98. His fasting blood glucose was 91. His CRP, his C-reactive protein, his primary marker of systemic inflammation was 0.3, almost immeasurably low for a man of any age, let alone 82. I looked at Edward and I said, Edward, I need to ask you some questions and I need you to answer them as specifically as you can, because I have patients who are 60 years old who would give anything to have the numbers I am looking at right now. And he smiled, the kind of smile that a man smiles when he knows something that most people around him do not. And he said, Dr. Chen, I will tell you everything. I am Dr. Daniel Chen. And what Edward told me that afternoon is what I want to share with you today. Because Edward is not a genetic miracle. He is not someone who is simply born with arteries destined to last. He is a man who smoked for 30 years, who had a father who died of a heart attack at 67, who had a brother who had coronary bypass surgery at 71, who had every reason to be sitting in a cardiologist's office at 82, with very different numbers than the ones I was looking at. But he is also a man who at the age of 55 made a decision that changed the trajectory of what was happening inside his arteries, and who for the 27 years since has eaten 6 specific foods every single day without exception. Foods that the research now tells us are among the most potent arterial protective compounds available to anyone at any age. Foods that, taken together, address the specific mechanisms that drive arterial aging and plaque development simultaneously from multiple directions at the same time. Let me tell you what those 6 foods are and why, at a biological level, they do what they do. The first food, Edward told me, was oats, specifically steel-cut oats, cooked slowly every single morning, without exception, for 27 years, he told me, the day I stopped smoking. I read everything I could find about what smoking had done to my arteries and everything I could find about what I could do to undo it. And oats kept coming up everywhere I looked, and so I started eating them the next morning, and I have eaten them every morning since. I have told Edward's story to many patients over the years, and the consistency of his commitment is what always strikes people first, every single morning for 27 years. But the science behind that commitment is what makes it make sense. Steel-cut oats, the least processed form of oats, in which the whole oat groat is simply cut, rather than rolled or flattened or extruded, has the highest and most intact beta-glucan content of any oat product available. Beta-glucan, as I have discussed in previous videos, is a soluble fiber that forms a viscous gel in the digestive system. That binds to bile acids and removes them from the body, forcing the liver to draw cholesterol from the bloodstream to make new bile acids, reducing circulating LDL, and specifically in research on arterial health, reducing the small, dense LDL particles that are most prone to penetrating the arterial wall and initiating plaque. The FDA has approved a cardiovascular health claim for oat beta-glucan, requiring 3 grams per day as part of a diet low in saturated fat, as potentially reducing the risk of heart disease. And 3 grams of beta-glucan is found in approximately 1.5 cups of cooked steel-cut oats. Edward's morning portion, every single morning for 27 years. The second food Edward ate every morning with his oats was a tablespoon of ground flaxseed stirred into the porridge while it was still warm. He told me, I read about flaxseed about 2 years after I stopped smoking, and I added it and never stopped. Ground flaxseed is one of the most extraordinary cardiovascular protective foods available for a combination of reasons that are rarely explained together in the way they deserve to be. First, it is the richest plant source of alpha-linolenic acid, an omega-3 fatty acid that reduces arterial inflammation through mechanisms shared with the marine omega-3s, EPA and DHA, from fatty fish. Second, it contains lignans, polyphenol compounds that are converted by gut bacteria into enterolignans that have potent antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects, specifically in arterial tissue, and that have been shown in research to reduce LDL oxidation, the process by which LDL cholesterol is chemically damaged and becomes the form that initiates plaque formation in the arterial wall. Third, it adds additional soluble fiber to the already high fiber beta-glucan content of the oats, creating a combined gel in the digestive system that slows gastric emptying, blunts post-meal blood sugar rises, reduces the insulin spikes that drive liver triglyceride production, and enhances the bile acid binding and cholesterol-reducing effect of the oats alone. Edward added a tablespoon of ground flaxseed, not whole flaxseed, because whole flaxseed passes through the digestive system largely intact, without releasing its internal nutrients. Ground flaxseed has its outer hull broken down, making the lignans and the omega-3 content bioavailable to the gut and the bloodstream. Every morning for 27 years, the third food Edward told me was fatty fish, specifically wild salmon and sardines, which he ate without fail at least 3 times per week, sometimes 4. He told me I grew up eating sardines. My mother served them on toast. And when I read about what they do for the heart, I was glad. I never stopped. The cardiovascular evidence for long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, from fatty fish is among the most extensive in all of nutritional science. I have discussed this in my previous video on the foods of the 80-year-old with remarkable cardiac health. But I want to add something here that is specifically relevant to Edward's story and to the calcium score that stunned his cardiologist. Research has shown that EPA and DHA do not simply reduce triglycerides and arterial inflammation in the general sense. They have been shown in specific mechanistic research to reduce the expression of adhesion molecules on the surface of endothelial cells, the inner lining of the arteries. Adhesion molecules are the proteins that monocytes, the immune cells responsible for foam cell formation, use to stick to the arterial wall and begin the process of plaque development. When omega-3 fatty acids reduce the expression of these adhesion molecules, they reduce the ability of the immune cells to attach to the arterial wall in the first place, reducing the earliest step in the cascade that leads from a healthy arterial wall to an atherosclerotic plaque. For Edward, a man who had smoked for 30 years and whose arteries had been exposed to the extraordinary endothelial damage of cigarette smoke for 3 decades before he stopped. This mechanism of reducing monocyte adhesion was not a minor benefit. It was a direct intervention in the process that the smoking had accelerated in his arterial walls for 30 years. 3 to 4 servings of wild salmon or sardines per week for 27 years. The fourth food Edward described was garlic, which he used in almost every savory meal he cooked every single day. He told me, "I eat at least 2 cloves most days, sometimes more. I have always loved garlic, and when I found out what it does to cholesterol and to blood vessels, I made sure I never cooked without it." I have discussed garlic at length in my previous video on arterial protection, but I want to highlight one specific mechanism of garlic's action that is particularly relevant to Edward's calcium score. Garlic contains compounds including allicin and its derivatives that have been shown to inhibit the oxidation of LDL cholesterol in the blood. Now remember, the calcium that the calcium scan detects in the coronary arteries is deposited within mature calcified plaques that have developed over years from soft, lipid-rich, foam cell-containing lesions into harder, more calcified structures. The development of those plaques begins with oxidized LDL penetrating the damaged endothelial lining and triggering the immune response that leads to foam cell formation. If you consistently inhibit LDL oxidation over decades, you reduce from the very first step the substrate for that plaque formation process. And Edward's calcium score of 28 at 82, and a man who smoked for 30 years, may partly reflect 27 years of consistent daily garlic consumption, protecting his LDL from the oxidation that would otherwise have driven far more extensive plaque development than his scan revealed. 2 cloves minimum, crushed, rested for 10 to 15 minutes before cooking every single day for 27 years. The 5th food was extra virgin olive oil. Edward told me he switched every other fat in his kitchen to extra virgin olive oil about 6 months after he stopped smoking. He said, "I threw out everything else, the butter, the margarine, the vegetable oil, everything. And I bought the best extra virgin olive oil I could find. And I have never used anything else since that day." As I described in my video on the cardiovascular patient with remarkable heart health, Extra virgin olive oil contains hydroxytyrosol, one of the most potent natural inhibitors of LDL oxidation known to science, and oleocanthal, which inhibits the same inflammatory enzymes as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, at the concentrations found in a good extra virgin olive oil. And the Predimed trial, one of the largest and most rigorous dietary intervention trials ever conducted, found that a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil at approximately 4 tablespoons per day reduced major cardiovascular events by approximately 30% compared to a low-fat diet in adults at high cardiovascular risk. Edward used it on everything: salads, vegetables, as a cooking fat, on bread, in marinades, generously every single day for 27 years. The 6th food Edward saved until last. He told me with a slight smile, he said, "This one people always find surprising." And then he told me, dark chocolate. Specifically, a small square of 85% cocoa dark chocolate. Every evening, after dinner, without fail, for as long as he could remember, he said. My wife bought it for me the year I stopped smoking because I was miserable without cigarettes, and she thought something sweet that was also good for me might help, and it did. And now it is just part of my evening. The flavanols in high cocoa content dark chocolate have been shown in multiple clinical trials to improve endothelial function, measured by flow-mediated dilation, a direct test of the ability of the arterial lining to produce nitric oxide and relax in response to increased blood flow. They reduce blood pressure through nitric oxide stimulation. They reduce platelet aggregation, and they reduce the oxidation of LDL. The cocoa supplement and multivitamin outcome study, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, found that cocoa flavanol supplementation over 2 years significantly reduced cardiovascular mortality in older adults compared to placebo. One small square of 85% cocoa dark chocolate, approximately 20 to 25 grams per evening, has enough flavanol content to provide meaningful cardiovascular benefit without the sugar load of lower cocoa percentage chocolates. And for Edward, it had been a nightly ritual for 27 years. The ritual his wife had started for him the year he stopped smoking, that had become part of the fabric of his evenings and of his cardiovascular health, without him ever fully separating the one from the other. Now I want to tell you what happened at the end of that appointment with Edward, because it is the part of that afternoon that has stayed with me most clearly. I had been taking notes as he described his 6 foods and his 27 years of consistency. And at the end, he looked at me and he said something that I want to share. With every person who watches this video, he said, Dr. Chen, I am not a scientist. I am not a doctor. I am an 82-year-old man who smoked for 30 years and who was frightened enough at 55 to read everything he could find about what he had done to himself and what he could do about it. And I picked the simplest things that kept coming up everywhere I looked, and I just did them every day without stopping. And I said, Edward, that is exactly what the science says to do. And very few people do it. And he said, I know. And that is the saddest thing about all of this. It is not complicated. It is just consistent. Let me bring everything together now. Edward is 82 years old, a former 30-year smoker with a family history of early cardiac death and coronary bypass surgery, whose coronary artery calcium score is 28, in a population where the median score for men his age is 300 to 400 or higher, whose cardiologist told him his arteries look like those of a man in his early 50s for 27 years, since the day he stopped smoking at 55. Edward has eaten 6 foods every single day, without exception. Steel-cut oats with their beta-glucan that reduces LDL, and specifically the most atherogenic LDL particles. Ground flaxseed with its omega-3s and lignans that reduce LDL oxidation and arterial inflammation. Fatty fish 3 to 4 times per week with EPA and DHA that reduce monocyte adhesion to the arterial wall and arterial inflammatory burden. Daily garlic crushed and rested with its allicin-derived compounds that protect LDL from oxidation and reduce the earliest step in plaque formation. Extra virgin olive oil as his only cooking fat with hydroxytyrosol and oleocanthal that protect the arterial lining and reduce inflammation at a molecular level. And the small square of 85% dark chocolate every evening with its flavanols that improve endothelial function, reduce blood pressure, and reduce platelet aggregation. 6 foods chosen carefully based on the best available evidence in 1997 when Edward first looked for them, and confirmed by 27 more years of research that has only strengthened the evidence behind every one of them. Done consistently every single day, without missing, without convenience, without waiting for a better time, for a different season, for a resolution that could start next week. Done every morning with a bowl of oats and a tablespoon of flaxseed, and a quiet certainty that the things he was putting in his body every day were doing something real inside his arteries that would one day show up on a piece of paper that would make his cardiologist check the chart twice to make sure he was looking at the right man. I am Dr. Daniel Chen. If this video gave you something that you are going to do starting tomorrow morning, please share it with someone over 65 who wants to know what an 82-year-old man with the arteries of a 50-year-old eats for breakfast. Subscribe to this channel for weekly videos made with genuine care for older adults who deserve real information about their own health. And leave me a comment below. Tell me which of Edward's 6 foods you are going to add to your daily diet starting tomorrow. I read every single comment, and I genuinely look forward to hearing from you. Take care of your arteries. They are not fixed. They are not fated. They are living tissue that responds to what you feed it every single day. Edward proved that at 82 with a calcium score that made his cardiologist reach for the chart and check the date of birth. One more time.